All right, let's welcome in our guest, Andrew Yang. Andrew, what's up?
Oh, just
It's a
grinding away.
It's a very loaded question, by the way. It's a very loaded question. I should say that.
I am 2020 good, or COVID fine, or whatever adjective you use for it to qualify the times. But just grinding away, trying to help people get elected in November. Most notably, Joe and Kamala at the top of the ticket. But I've also endorsed a couple dozen local candidates, and so just zooming in to a lot of places, trying to generate attention, resources. I'm really excited about some of the possible outcomes in November. A poll just came out today that said that Joe's up 57-41 nationally among likely voters. And if that's the case, then you're going to see victories in some places you're not going to expect it. Places that have not been very competitive over the last number of years.
Andrew, can you explain, JJ and I were talking about this earlier, can you explain to the audience, because I think I'm sure a lot of people listening to this show are going to say, well, the polls said that Hillary was up in 2016. And then, clearly what happened was not representative of what the poll said. And so can you sort of explain what whether we should take the poll seriously, what the significance of seeing numbers like that at this stage in the game mean?
So the polls are a set of data points, really. And can the data steer you wrong like they did in 2016? Yes. Though you can see that, let's say the polls had Hillary winning by 7 points. She won the popular vote by 3 points, but the electoral vote just mapped out so that Trump had what he needed to win. So the polls, even in 2016, weren't disastrously off in terms of direction. The gap this time is more substantial and more widespread, where if you go to a battleground state like Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Florida, Joe's also leading, maybe at a lower level than nationally. So are the polls foolproof? No. Are the polls totally dismissible and irrelevant? Also, no. I mean, they're the best data points we have right now. And if they're all saying similar things, then it becomes more reliable.
Actually, my first question for you kind of just touched on, and that's just about what it is you're actually doing right now in the weeks and the months leading up to the election. So logistically, what does it look like when you say, I'm trying to help Joe get elected and I'm trying to help these other candidates get elected in different states?
Well, sure, JJ, you could join me in any of these things. So the first thing is the first thing is that Joe and Kamala send requests into my team saying, hey, Joe would like you to show up to a call center rally for Ohio or a Wisconsin Get Out the Vote event. And I say yes to all of those. So my schedule then is filled with various, Andrew Yang talking to a couple hundred people in a swing state being like, let's do it. So there's that. Joe and Kamala have asked me to travel for them, which I've said yes to. So I'm still waiting for word as to what that's going to look like. I'm not sure if plans have changed with the entire Trump COVID firestorm of the last week. The candidates I've endorsed are congressional or, in some cases, state assembly and local candidates. And then they ask me to do a Zoom fundraiser for them. And so I say yes, because if you're going to endorse someone and then you'd be like, and now I do nothing for you, it's kind of a dick move. So after I endorse, then my team then says, sure, Andrew will show up to at least one thing for your campaign. So I'll show up to a town hall. I did a town hall earlier this morning for a Senate candidate in West Virginia, Paula Jean Swearingen. And I'm optimistic that, again, we're going to see some victories in places like Texas and Alaska and South Carolina and places that you don't think of as particularly purple or competitive. You're like, is it really the case that Lindsey Graham could lose to a black dude, Jamie Harrison, in South Carolina? And I'm here to say, oh, yeah, there's a real chance of it.
JJ and I were talking about this the other day. Lindsey looked super shook in that debate on Saturday night.
a lot of these deep incumbents, Tommy, have not really been in a fierce race in decades, which I think is the case for Lindsey too. So imagine you've been hanging out in DC, you're a senator, no one can touch you, you're in like the reddest state around, you've got like a $10 million funding advantage over any upstart. You haven't had to actually get out in front of the public and impress anyone like a long time. So some of these folks really are not that ready for a competitive race mentally. As someone who's been in these races, for me, it's like I was the constant underdog, and like you did need to fortify yourself. Just like let's say, and I know Lindsey's opponent, Jamie Harrison. So Jamie's been campaigning in South Carolina, and for a long time, everyone wrote him off. Everyone was like, "You don't have a chance. It's South Carolina, Lindsey Graham." But then, with every step he's taking, he's getting more and more confident, getting more and more energy and resources, and then the opposite is happening for for Lindsey. So I really think Lindsey could be done, in November.
That's a crazy thought. Speaking of senators, I wanted to touch on something that I just saw literally 20 minutes ago as I was scrolling through Twitter, and that was Ted Cruz's comments about the NBA. He seems to like to tweet about the NBA. He spends a lot of time actually tweeting about the NBA, and it was a quote tweet about the low ratings that we've had during the finals, and he used, he made fun of it, and he used the hashtag "Go Woke, Go Broke." And I just have such a problem with this line of thinking, because, and he used the phrase something like espousing, when the NBA espouses liberal policies, everybody turns it off, right? And so one of the things that is interesting is, this idea, not necessarily the organization, but the idea that Black Lives Matter, that we need to reform policing, that we need to stop disenfranchising Black people in America. That doesn't seem like a political issue. We've said it time and time and again. It seems like a moral issue. So if Ted Cruz is unwilling, and Ted Cruz's base is unwilling to just acknowledge that that's a moral issue, isn't that in and of itself reinforcing their own racism, if they're unwilling to acknowledge it? And maybe that's harsh of me to say, but I guess how else do you get out of that circle unless you're just reinforcing your own bigotry?
First, I've got a bone to pick with Ted Cruz because he said yes to a one-on-one game with me for charity. You can look it up online. He said, like, just bring it, Andrew. And I was like, this is happening. And then he just freaking ghosted me and my team. My team was like, hey, like name the time, the place, like, we'll do this thing. And he just literally freaking, pretended he didn't say yes. It was like, so that's Ted Cruz. And I agree with you 100%, JJ, that this should not be considered a political statement. Like the fact that there are far too many Black men and women that have been subject to mistreatment and violence and brutality and dehumanization, and even in some cases had their lives taken by police officers, is just a human rights issue that we should all be looking at and saying, why is this still happening? Like, what can we do to change it? So to me, this is just something where Ted's looking for attention, really. He wants to cast the NBA as taking a political stance because that helps him in his races. He runs in Texas, and he's got like a very conservative base in Texas. Though I will say even Texas is going increasingly purple. And that's one of the things that I'm excited about, is like the things you take for granted in politics, you might not be able to take for granted post 2020. But yeah, like it just cements Ted Cruz's status as a very unlikable human being. The fact that he's like taking shots at the NBA for taking what to me are human rights issues and elevating them.
Real quick, I just want to say one thing about the ratings. Across the board, any sporting event that is usually held in May or June and is now being held in August, September, October across the board. It's like record low rating, drops of 50%. So the NBA is sort of not alone in this. And this is really the issue that we have, of course, with any thought of moving our schedule till later in the year and sort of avoiding football is, this is sort of the viewership cycle that we're under, and this is when people watch television. And we're trying to compete with the NFL, and you just can't do it. Like, the NFL owns the fall. That's just a reality. Don't think for a second I haven't forgot about this one-on-one game, because I want to go back to this. Okay. So who would win in a one-on-one game between you and Ted Cruz?
I would whip Ted Cruz, but I will say this: when I made the challenge and he said yes, there was a period when I was like, I better not fucking lose this game. so then I started thinking like, oh snap, like maybe I should actually take
train.
this seriously and like train, like do something unusual for a weekend warrior like myself. But then my confidence quickly rose, like after people would send me clips of it. And actually, I'll tell you what really made my confidence sky high is I was on Jimmy Kimmel shortly after Ted said yes to my challenge. And I don't know if you know, Jimmy played a charity game one-on-one with Ted in Houston, I believe. And so I got a scouting report from Jimmy. And after that, I was like, okay, like I really have nothing to worry about. As Jimmy told me about Ted. He's like, look, he just grabs you. Like, there are all these things we edited out where it was just him hugging me. I was like, okay, that gives me a picture of what the actual game would look like. I like you, JJ. I want to go back to this ratings thing because, like, to me, like, it's really unintelligent of Ted to ascribe ratings to any kind of messaging around the NBA. There are probably like half a dozen other factors that would go into it. Primarily, the one you just named, which is just that people aren't accustomed to watching NBA playoffs in September and October. They're accustomed to watching it back in the spring, early summer. And right now, you associate this time with other sporting events, and ratings overall are down.
Yeah. I mean, some of the other sporting events that I'm talking about are, NHL playoffs, baseball, the U.S. Open for golf, I believe some horse races. Like, none of those I would be categorized as being like woke leagues, and their ratings are down across the board as well. So I don't think the correlation is there. And granted, I'm willing to admit there's definitely some people that have turned off their televisions from the NBA because politics and sports now there's sort of a mixture there that hasn't existed to the extent that it exists now.
Well, I'd be interested in seeing what those numbers are. I figure the NBA probably has those numbers, but I couldn't agree with you more that to me, and this is someone who uses social media and considers myself like an analytical sort, I would never make that association when I knew that there were like half a dozen other explanations and sporting events that had nothing to do with politics that are seeing the same thing. So that to me is just really irresponsible. Where you make a connection where you can see pretty clearly it's not real, or if it is real, it's like only a tiny part of the true explanation. I would be curious what the NBA found in terms of the numbers of fans who actually turn on the TV. To me, that must be a very, very small number.
We talked about this with Mark Cuban a few weeks ago, and he's gotten into it with Ted before, and he's getting into it with him today a little bit as well. But it's baffling to me, and today's the most recent example, but we saw it with Trump in the debate last week where he had that random thing about I saved the Big Ten and all these things like this, where these guys, and it's Trump is guilty of this, but it's also Republican senators. It's Cruz, it's Hawley in Missouri. There's a few other ones who, rather than focusing on the coronavirus, which is ravaging the country and ravaging the economy, and we're going to get to that in a second, they focus on things like NBA ratings. Like, why is a U.S. senator even talking? Why do we care whether he even watches the NBA? Like, what does that have to do with anything that actually matters in terms of what he's supposed to be doing for his job?
This is, to me, one of the biggest problems we have to address is that politics has become about language and how we feel and symbolism more than policy and outcomes and results and human well-being. And it's killing us because you see politicians on both sides, frankly, will just end up evoking various types of feelings and symbolism, and it leads us nowhere. The toughest part about what happened in the wake of George Floyd's death and Black Lives Matter is that when you dig in and try and find, for example, the national legislation that was passed as a result, or the local police departments who reformed their practices, that's where the rubber hits the road, and that change is what we should be focused on. Certainly, to me, Trump is the master of this, or the worst about this, where he's constantly just throwing out these rhetorical grenades that end up just pissing people off and like dividing you, and it's just like a distract-a-thon. And we have to try and move past all that to, okay, like what are the actual problems? What do we really need to do? How will we know whether what we did was successful? Our society has moved well away from that, and the media is a huge part of that, because the media finds it easier just to reinforce narratives of back and forth and like this person said something wrong and we should be mad, than actually trying to dig in as to, okay, like what has actually changed legislatively, policy-wise, in the numbers, in our way of life.
Does this come down to just electing the right people, or is this a situation and a society really where we've created this political climate and there's no turning back? There's no way to dig ourselves out of this. I hope to God that you could give me some hope for some form of, I don't even want to call it normalcy, because I don't even know what normalcy means anymore, but just give me some hope for 2021. Just give me something here. How do we get ourselves out of this climate beyond just, let's say, obviously we talk about on the pod, I'm going to vote for Biden. Biden wins, but beyond just Biden winning, like how do we actually just heal this divide that we have in our country right now?
Job one is Trump out, Joe and Kamala in, Democratic Congress, because the biggest set of issues are COVID and the recession / jobs depression that is resulted from COVID. And you need Congress to take very, very dramatic measures in order to try and make it so that, for example, independent restaurants survive. I just talked to Jose Andres, and he said that he thinks 50% of independent restaurants will go out of business in the next period of weeks if there's not some kind of additional relief, and that there's legislation that he's proposed and the House approved and like hasn't been passed that might help on that. So that set of real challenges to me is job one, that we need to hopefully start digging out of come January. But to your point, JJ, the polarization is bigger than that. It's bigger than this election. And the polarization is in large part driven by the financial incentives of various media and social media organizations, where if you have Fox or MSNBC and they look up and say, okay, like what are our financial incentives? We need to keep our ratings high so we can sell advertising and keep our cable franchise high. And they've found very consistently that the more they dramatize and sensationalize and gin things up, then it's better for their ratings. If you have the most objective, rational news, let's call it C-SPAN, which I appreciate. I love me some C-SPAN. That isn't very personality driven, then the ratings tend to drift lower. And so you have those incentives among the media organizations that just benefit from polarization. And then you have even revved up exponential incentives around every social media niche. Because again, if you come out and you had like a fairly objective, rational social media account, everyone would ignore it. But then if you were like, oh, I'm pissed off, I blame them, like, hate them with me, then you'll get a following. And that helps the individual actors, that helps the social media companies. I don't know if you saw the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, that came out recently. It's great. It's like required watching in my mind. But it speaks to the financial incentives of a lot of the actors around maximizing engagement. And the way you maximize engagement in human beings is by
Trolling,
like scaring
by
us,
trolling.
pissing us off, like trolling. Part of that documentary, they say that untruths spread 6 times faster on social media than truths. And so your natural incentives are to try and push that boundary of the truth as far as you can. So JJ, if you really want to get all of this under control, you have to try and mitigate the incentives of these media organizations, the social media companies, and the people that are using it.
Do you feel like, part of the thing, which is in the social dilemma, covered this, but like we were having this conversation about Facebook in 2016 with fake news right after 2016, and the idea that this is still happening. Like, is there a legislative solution? Like, how do you get these companies without just straight up going in there and, telling them you have to do this? How do you get them to basically clean up their act? Is it public pressure of the executives? Like, what's the way to get them to, because like the Facebook problem, and they get into this in that movie, and a couple of other recent docs have covered this as well. It's not unique to the US. I mean, Facebook has led to rebellions all over the world, and some argue that it's like responsible for like the destabilization of democracy in a lot of parts of the world.
We've given Facebook every opportunity in the book to mature, take responsibility, say, look, we're going to change certain practices, and they don't want to do it. That there was someone, Roger McNamee, who was in that documentary, says that from the perspective of Facebook executives, everything is friction. It's like, how do I reduce the friction so I can keep on growing and printing tens of billions of dollars a year? So if there was a chance for them to self-moderate, it would have happened by now. At this point, you have to face facts and say, look, like they don't genuinely want to take these responsibilities. So we're going to have some kind of government counterbalance to this where they're forced to. And at this point, the vast majority of Americans agree with that. We all look up and say, you know what? Like it could be that we've let some of these Facebook abuses go a little bit too extreme, too long. I mean, you had like a major advertiser boycott of Facebook earlier this year. I think it was in July, where you had major companies like Procter & Gamble say, we're not going to advertise on your platform for a month. And then Facebook internally said, you know what, guys, like all these major advertisers account for less than 5% of our revenue. Like it'll be fine, So that's where we are right now.
But who's responsible for their revenue? Like if the advertiser boycott doesn't work, like what is the thing that will, besides the government just straight up breaking them up? Like what is the thing that would actually dent them and get them to kind of clean their act up in a real way?
The first thing you have to do is say to them, look, Facebook, guess what? You're a publisher. You're maybe the biggest publisher in the history of the world. They've actually resisted saying they're a publisher because then they say, like, we have no responsibility for any of the content. We're a platform. And there's this 1996 law before Facebook even existed that says that you don't need to take responsibility for posts on your platform, essentially. So they've built like $1 trillion business or like $650 billion business on that like provision that, didn't even, predict that Facebook would have existed, where they're like, we have no responsibility, nothing to see here. And the darkness of what's really happening, Tommy, is that there are a lot of choices you have to make about what's acceptable and unacceptable content on Facebook. AI cannot do it all. So they have hundreds of humans who are staring at the darkest shit in the history of mankind, being like, this is terrible, this is rancid, this does not belong. But they don't want to make those people employees because they're like, we don't want to employ people to do this stuff. So they contract. Imagine an army of contractors just watching like the dregs of humanity like manifest on Facebook. They literally end up traumatized, like needing therapy. And like Facebook actually paid out a class action lawsuit being like, here's some money for your therapy. That's legitimately what is going on in the bowels of a $650 billion business. So the reckoning is coming, I believe, because people recognize the need. And it's not happening internally at this point. It's going to happen externally. The reason why the large advertiser boycott didn't do anything is that they have such a massive long tail of local advertisers that the big advertisers don't account for a big chunk of their budget.
Andrew, I think we're 25 minutes into this and we haven't even brought up your run for the Democratic presidential nominee. So I want to kind of go there right now. Little backstory, and Andrew knows this. I had read a couple articles about Andrew when he announced his run, and then he went on Sam Harris's podcast and did a pretty big deep dive on universal basic income with Sam and some of the other stuff that you were running on. And I'm a huge fan of the concept of UBI, and part of your platform, you ran on this concept of human-centered capitalism. Can you just describe what that actually means?
First, I want to thank JJ for being a man of action, where he not only says, hey, I like universal basic income, but he's donated to a universal basic income trial in a town called Hudson, New York, and another trial that is going to be really significant. So thank you, JJ, to you and your family for stepping up, really, and showing that people can help people. And that's what human-centered capitalism is meant to lead us towards, where right now we have a form of capitalism that's maximizing corporate profits, GDP, stock market valuations, and our quality of life is actually trending negatively, where if you look at our mental health, our drug overdoses, our stress levels, our relationships, our civic engagement, they're all heading into the toilet, even as capital efficiency numbers go up and up. So human-centered capitalism would try and recast why we're doing what we're doing, where we say, look, the goals of the economy should be that we live longer, healthier lives, we're mentally healthier, our kids are doing better, our air and water are clean, our babies aren't dying, like a series of basic measurements that we could all agree on as being indicative of our well-being as human beings. So the goals of capitalism should be us and not Amazon. Because what's good for Amazon is increasingly like unrelated to how we're doing it. Actually might even be negative at this point because, of the fact that Amazon is closing 30% of our malls. And, like a lot of people used to work at those malls. I use Amazon. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we all, like a lot of us do.
Yeah.
I use Amazon.
It's hard. It's really hard not to.
It's hard not to.
It's hard not to, right? So I use it, but I also recognize that Amazon does not reflect the well-being of tens of millions of Americans, and that we should be focused on the latter and not the former. So that's what human-centered capitalism is meant to do, JJ, is just meant to give us different and better goals. And there was a piece by Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times the other day that said that if you used social measurements as to how we're doing, we are 28th in the world and going down right now. We're like 31st in something like clean water or infant mortality. And so we've just lost the thread. I've run organizations, and if you have the wrong measurements, you're sunk. We're just using the wrong measurements for how we're doing.
I think a lot of people, when you talk about some of these things and when you really get into some of the policy changes that you propose and that also many people in the Democratic Party have proposed, the knee-jerk reaction is to use the S word, right? It's, oh, that's socialist. I don't want to live in a socialist society. I don't want to. That's socialism. You're a socialist. That's like what every time we talk about well-being. Whether it's having a UBI to fall back on, mental health, healthcare, all these things, it's all comes down to socialism. You're a very intelligent person. You're way smarter than me. I would have to assume, just like many countries in this world, that we can simultaneously live in a society that embraces capitalism but also takes care of our citizens. I think the two can go hand in hand, right? There's a way to do that.
100%. And universal basic income isn't neatly left or right. And right now, 55% of Americans actually believe that we should have universal basic income now and forever. And 82% of Americans believe that we should have cash relief during the pandemic, including a majority of both parties. I sure wish that 55% of people were pro universal basic income back when I was running earlier this year.
I was going to say, you were just ahead of your time.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this. So when you decided to make this run, and a huge part of your platform was UBI, was this about bringing awareness to UBI, or was this like you thought maybe you had a legitimate chance to win the nominee?
I'll tell a story that most people don't know. When I was first formulating the campaign and building the website or whatnot, it was called UBI 2020.
Wow.
I was literally like, this thing just needs to happen, and I need to make the case for it. And I care more about universal basic income and the elevation of our way of life than I do, like, Andrew Yang's political career. So it's like UBI 2020, and it was like a last minute change where my team was like, "Hey, we've done some testing, and people seem to need like a person to pin everything on. So we think we should call this thing Yang 2020 instead of UBI 2020." And I was like, well, if that's what the data says, like let's do it. And I think that was the right call. But yeah, to your point, JJ, like I was about universal basic income and human-centered capitalism. And we had a whole, as you know, like a platform of 150 plus policies over time. But I was very content to be like, universal basic income is the mission. And if we get this done, then that's success.
And do you feel like that it was a success? Because it seems like this is part of the dialogue and the conversation now. UBI is out there. More people are talking about it. You have gained this, I don't want to call it a cult-like following, but you've gained this huge following from your run and from your campaign. Shout out Yang Gang. And now more and more people are talking about this and promoting this and bringing awareness to this idea. And so I would assume for you that your run you look back on your run as a huge success.
Oh yeah. I mean, right now, millions of Americans have woken up to the reality that universal basic income is the future and we should adopt it as soon as possible. One of the things that's given me a lot of joy is that it stopped being the magical Asian man and the enlightened all-time great NBA three-point shooter and some other singular figures. But now it's been being championed by dozens of mayors around the country. There's mayors for guaranteed income where they're launching pilots all over the country, from Stockton to Atlanta to St. Paul. And a lot of these mayors are progressive mayors of color. And that makes sense given that the heritage of this idea was with Martin Luther King Jr., who was fighting for it when he was assassinated. So I feel very, very proud of the success of the campaign in elevating universal basic income, because that number was not 55% when I started. It was like 20. It literally was like I the campaign literally saw the rise of maybe like 25 to 30% approval rating over time. And I'm grateful to the Yang Gang for helping make that happen.
I asked you this when I was on your podcast, and thank you for having me on. But for our listeners, what were some of the lessons that you learned on the campaign trail that you didn't know before because you were sort of an outsider and a non-political figure prior to this?
I learned a lot about the ins and outs of how our politics work and media works, really. Like I was shell-shocked when they'd run a graphic on MSNBC or one of these channels and they'd just exclude me. I was like, wait a minute, I should have been on that one. We raised this much money, and that was right between those two. So that kind of thing blew my mind, because I just thought that, obviously if you're a news channel, you would just freaking report at least some version of reality in a reliable way. So that was a learning. One of the things that right now I'm focused on is trying to translate the popular will to policy and legislation. So check this out. let's say a majority of us are for universal basic income, which right now is the case. And then you're like, okay, then it should become law. Or a majority of us are for some form of police reform. Well, shouldn't that become law? And it's like, well, a lot of people are frustrated by the fact climate change. You could throw a number of things in where the vast majority of Americans could be for it, and then we're all looking around,
gun control,
wondering why it's not. Gun control, cash relief during a pandemic.
Not take away your guns, but some form of gun control. Just to be clear.
Yeah, common sense gun safety regulations that like the vast majority of Americans agree with. And so then you look up, and so now I'm translating my learnings to like, okay, why is it that what we think does not seem to actually change the laws? And so then I started digging into the incentives of legislators, where right now, as we're having this conversation, the national approval rating for Congress is 21%, very low, and that's like pretty shitty if you think about it. Like 4 out of 5 Americans are unhappy with the job you're doing. But the re-election rate for incumbents is 94%. So if you're an individual incumbent, you're like, wait a minute, my incentives are to make sure I don't get primaried, because a lot of my districts are drawn. Over 80% of the districts are drawn where it's clean Democrat or clean Republican. So I care more about getting challenged by someone to my extreme left or right than I do someone from the other side. And I have a built-in cash advantage of, let's call it $1.6 million if I'm a member of Congress, or $10.4 million if I'm a senator, where if I just can maintain my cash advantage and avoid an extreme challenger that gets enough momentum, then I'm going to win 94% of the time. So because of that set of incentives, you don't see people compromising, reaching across the aisle, hammering out a deal. Their incentives are actually more around, I can blame the other side and win. Then if I compromise, I'm actually more likely to get challenged in a real way and potentially lose. So that's what now I want to try and change. And one of the main ways we can change that is through adopting ranked choice voting around the country. Because then if you have ranked choice voting in an open primary, then I need people to be cool with me on like all sides of the aisle, at least like not hate me. My incentives to campaign negatively go way down, because if I trash one of my opponents, we both look bad, and then the third place person ends up beating us both. So you wind up with like a better approach to politics if we actually change the mechanics of how these people get elected and reelected. And you don't think of mechanics as that sexy, but in this case, ranked choice voting to me is like the way we can actually change the incentives of legislators so that they listen to what we think.
So do you think that's a fix for, I was going to ask you about like the Democratic Party on a macro level. And I know there's been a lot of, call it what you want, frustration, anger, tears that are after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg a few weeks back. When you look at how Mitch McConnell operates and how he is, hate him or love him, a lot of people hate him, but he's surgical. He gets things done. And the Republicans have won the popular vote in like one of the last 7 elections or something like that. And yet they're about to put another justice in the Supreme Court. And they basically they figured out how to win the system like you're talking about. So do you think do you think that this fix would even this out a little bit, where it's basically like you can't have a party that is consistently losing the actual popular vote, but yet is able to sort of exert their will legislatively?
Ranked choice voting would help democracy actually represent the will of the people. And one thing that's happening right now, and I'm sure people listening to this, a lot of people are in this bucket, where you might like someone and then they'll tell you, well, you can't vote for that person because you'll be wasting your vote. Like you have to put your vote behind someone who is one of like the major 2 contenders, generally from one of the 2 major parties. And so it ends up stifling any kind of real change politically. And that ends up leading to this hyperpolarization you're describing, where if you're the Republicans, then you're like, I'm going to stick it to the other side, and I'm better served by sticking it to the other side than by doing something that more people in my district would find to be reasonable.
Andrew, for information on ranked choice voting, UBI, I mean, I know the answer, but can you just tell the listener about Humanity Forward and the website and where they can go to sort of just get more information on all this stuff?
You know what's funny, JJ, is like, so I'll certainly talk about Humanity Forward, but I actually think there are probably better places to go for ranked choice voting info. It's like we don't have like the greatest, the greatest literature. My organization, Humanity Forward, thanks to people like JJ, we're putting economic relief into people's hands. We've given $8 million plus away since the pandemic started, just trying to help people. We're endorsing down ballot candidates who are for universal basic income and humanizing the economy. So if you want to help and on those levels, definitely come to movehumanityforward.com. You can follow me on social media. We're just continuing to fight for the things that animated my campaign. For universal basic income, it's funny. There's this blogger named Scott Santens who's been studying it for years, who just knows everything about every study that pops up. Like he's literally like a full-time literature compiler. So Scott Santens is like the universal basic income guru who I learned a lot from. And for ranked choice voting, there's an organization called Fair Vote that is championing ranked choice voting. It's on the ballot in Massachusetts and Alaska this November. I think ranked choice voting is going to sweep the country, because if you just go to voters and say, hey, how would you like to not have anyone yell at you about wasting your vote, and just list candidates in order of your preference, and that's it. And then everyone's like, oh, that does seem better. And it ends up expressing your preferences in a more accurate way. It punishes the extremes more. And rewards people that can build like a broad coalition. It punishes negative campaigning. It would just clean up our act. Anyone who's not for ranked choice voting, like, to me, there's something amiss about, because like if you look at it, like you have to be essentially like not excited about hearing what people think if you don't like ranked choice voting. Like there has to be something where you're like, oh, don't want these people actually expressing their preferences. So ranked choice voting to me is going to have its moment. And I'd love to freaking make that moment right now, like 2020, 2022. Ideally, by 2022, we can have it all over the country.
I follow Scott on Twitter. He's a great follow. I highly recommend that. I will quote tweet one of his tweets so that anybody who wants to follow along and get some more info on UBI, you can do that. Before I move on from UBI, by the way, I just want to talk about, because a lot of people say, well, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for putting $1,000 in everybody's pocket every month? First of all, what you've proposed is an opt-in. You have to opt in to get UBI. But just talk a little bit about your proposal to pay for that. The idea, of course, is a value-added tax, which is used in a lot of the world, but is not used here in America.
So how is it that a $1 trillion tech company like Amazon can pay zero in taxes? Like there's no one of any like political stripe that's like, ooh, that sounds right. And if you're a small business owner, as I have been, I think JJ and Tommy might be small business owners at this point.
We are. We're grinding, man. We're basically a startup.
Yeah. So that they see the tax rate they pay and they're like, it's not zero. Like it's a whole lot higher than that. I mean, if it's based in New York, you guys are probably paying 50, like I was. So you have to ask yourself, how the heck is Amazon gaming the tax code so badly? And it's because if you're multinational in particular, you can just move all the money through Ireland or Bermuda or one of the tax havens and just park it and never have to pay taxes. So if we harness the gains of the Amazons and the autonomous vehicle companies and the AI software and the rest of it, and get a chunk of that and put it into our hands, we can afford a lot of things very, very quickly. And then the money, after it comes into our hands, we just end up spending it on groceries and car repairs and local nonprofits. And the money just flows over and over again through our economy. It ends up creating value. It saves us billions, maybe even trillions on education, healthcare costs, mental health. It would catalyze the formation of hundreds of thousands of new businesses. It would start recognizing the kind of work that my wife Evelyn does every day, taking care of our boys, one of whom is autistic. It would reward artists, creativity, musicians, podcasters, you know, you name it, like the money would just end up flowing back into our hands. And you can see very clearly we have the money right now because like everyone was like, oh, where's the money going to come from? And then they just write a $2.2 trillion like stimulus bill, the vast majority of which went right into the banks and megacorps. Like human beings directly got something like, you know, less than 10% of that 2.2 trillion, despite the $1,200 checks that they sent everyone. You know, don't be fooled. Like $1,200 times the people that got it was not $2.2 trillion. It was something like 185 billion, which is like less than 10% of the 2.2 trillion. So we have the money. We just got to get it into our hands where it can actually do the most good and then help our local businesses, our local nonprofits, like the folks in our lives. That's the path forward. But we have the resources for sure.
I want to ask you about and talk a little bit about the pivot, because I think you're someone that's mastered the pivot. And for the listener, so Andrew was a corporate lawyer. Then you did some tech startups. You worked for Manhattan Prep. Then you started Venture for America, a nonprofit. Then you ran for the Democratic nominee for president. Then you started Humanity Forward. And a lot of people get locked into one thing or another. I've been locked into one thing for a long time. And there's something about, and I don't know whether it's entrepreneurialism, but there's something about your spirit and your makeup that has allowed you to successfully pivot from one thing to the next. And that's I don't know if it's a skill or a trait that can be developed, but it's something that I think you've mastered.
Well, it's kind of you to say, JJ. I mean, when I get asked about this sort of thing, I reflect on when I was in my 20s, and the big pivot I had was when I left my steady job to start a business, and that was brutally difficult. So difficult that my company failed, and you know, like I was living with a friend, and like I still owed 6 figures in school loans because it turns out that schools don't forgive your loans if you start a company. That's not how it works. They're like, oh, you're trying to do something? Well, let's take care of that debt load for you. So I remember in my 20s, it was brutal. I used to call my loans my mistress because I was like writing a check to another town. I was like, I hope Sally Mae's having a great life. You know, well, so that was like a very challenging time, and my confidence was shot. And the way that I got through it was, I think the way it happens for a lot of people is just by managing to become friends with or surrounded by, ideally, people who are just trying to make good things happen, where if you're also someone who's trying to make good things happen and you can contribute, then you end up working together in different capacities. So I worked for an entrepreneur, and then another one, and then another one, and became the CEO of a company that did quite well. And at that point, then, you know, I had a degree of experience and confidence, but that was a long time coming. Like the way we build confidence is by having some degree of success and reinforcement in an environment. It's why probably one reason why you and Tommy enjoy working together and whatnot. It's like we just like working with other people, so that are good, that are like made up the same way we are. So to the extent I've been able to successfully pivot, it's because I've been fortunate to both attract and be attracted to folks who wanted to make good things happen. And that's what I would advise people on. It's like, it's not about you being like a freaking superhuman, though, you know, like you got to kick ass and, you know, like, you know, try and walk through fire occasionally. But if you're around people that want to see you succeed and you can help them succeed, then the sky's the limit. And so you just have to try and find those people and then invest in those relationships.
I think there's a lot of people that have a steady job that want to do something else. They want to pursue something else. They want to start a business. They want to pursue a passion. They want to pursue a dream. Walk me through your decision at that time of leaving that steady job, and to some degree the sort of courage, the stones it took to leave that. I mean, you went to Columbia Law School. Like you could have followed a certain path and you would have been fine. You probably would have at some point paid off those student loans too.
And I'm Asian. So, JJ, I mean, first, like, it's a different time where, if someone has a steady job now, and I was young and single, I remember thinking to myself, I was 25 at the time, I was like, man, why am I acting like I have a mortgage and kids? I don't have shit. Like, I don't have a girlfriend. Like, why, like, what am I protecting here? It's like, if I'm not going to do something now, I'm never going to do something. So that was one of the things that drove me. You have to look at who you are and where you are right now. And at that time, I was like, look, I'm 25, and if I don't try and do something now, I'm never going to do something. So that drove me. The fact that I'd kind of seen what the corporate life was going to be, and I felt myself adapting to it, and it was not a positive adaptation, shall we say. Like, I felt myself becoming more and more of a tool. Frankly, it was like, like maybe a little bit young to just sort of like,
wait a minute, hold on a second. Like a tool for the man, or like a tool like a douche?
Definitely both.
We all know the type. We know this description.
Well, one of the things that I think is baked into human nature is, like, if you do something you do not like every day for a long time, you will probably become like an unhappy person who's like just less cool, kind, whatever the hell. Like, it's like that. This is the way I think most people are. So I was doing a job that I did not like, and I was like, man, and I felt myself becoming more of an asshole. And I was like, man, if I do that, like, what the hell am I doing? Like, is this really like like the hopes and dreams that my parents came to this country for? So that was one of the things that drove me, was, the sense that the corporate gig was not a good fit. I was young and had some tolerance for risk, and like thought I was going to take a shot at it. What's funny is that shot totally failed. Like my company flopped miserably. But then after you do that, like, you end up developing different capacities or muscles that you did not have before. And so, I was a failed entrepreneur, and then I was like the sidekick to another entrepreneur. Then I became the CEO of a company, and like, you just kind of develop different capacities over time based on the direction you're heading. Certainly, if I knew how rough it was going to be when I quit that job, like, maybe I would have had second thought. But then you're in it. You're like, it was the same running for president too. It was like a startup where I was like, okay, I'm going to run for president. We're going to do this thing. We're going to elevate universal basic income. And then you get out there and you're like, whoa. Like, this is really not easy at all. But then, like, you don't have a choice at that point. You're like, well, fuck this. Like, I took my friend's money. I better fucking run for president. Like,
Can't just quit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the secret to entrepreneurship, really, is like, fucking take someone who you care about deeply's money, and then you'll be like, well, now I don't have a fucking choice, but I better and not like JJ Redick's money where he's not going to care. like take someone's money where it's like, man, it's really, really meaningful. Yeah. And then you'll be like, I better fucking make this work. So that's one of the secrets.
I was going to mention, Andrew, earlier, you wrote a really good op-ed for Vox, I think either last month or the month before, about basically putting millennials to work to fix the country's infrastructure, which everyone listening to this should look up and read. But, this was definitely the case with your presidential run. You've always had a very young base. Like, whatever the demo is, like 22 to 34, whatever it is.
I won the Iowa youth vote. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it just is, and I've like, we've been to some of your events, and it's like, it's all kids and everything like that. Yeah. Like that is this. It's a really rough, not to sort of sidetrack, but it's a really rough time for young people right now in a weird way, because
that's terrible.
They're not necessarily the people that are at risk of dying from COVID, the same way seniors are, people with certain pre-existing conditions are. But like, if you're a college kid, or you're just out of college and you're used to basically trying to find your way in the job market, and all of a sudden, like, you not only can you not get a job because all these jobs are going away because of the virus, you can't even really see people, you can't really go to parties. You're basically like stuck on Twitter, just getting angrier and angrier, and it just sucks. And I know people aren't necessarily like feeling sorry for them in the grand scheme of things, but it is a thing that's really rough. Like, how do you think that, like this plan, the infrastructure plan, can give them like a way forward?
We need to invest in the paths for young people, and I feel for them. Like that we have left them a shambles even pre-pandemic, where you have these insecure livelihoods after taking on record debt loads because we made college 2.5 times more expensive, and the rest of it. And to me, some form of public investment in ways for them to contribute and develop. Like young people want to go someplace where they'll actually learn, be valued, develop professionally, do something that they feel positively about. It's one reason why a lot of folks, like in the Vox article I wrote, it's like, look, do we need people to help teach our kids or like make ourselves mentally healthier and stronger? Like, yes. Do we need to rebuild bridges and roads and schools and everything else? Yes. Like there is work for all of us. The problem is that the marketplace right now is not supporting those opportunities for young people in particular. And I feel for young people because it's very hard to make inroads into an organization right now where we're all Zooming and whatnot. It's like if you've worked with someone for months or years and then you're on Zoom, it's like, yeah, it's fine. But imagine being like a young person who like no one freaking knows, being like, hey, I'm here now.
It's really hard. And people don't talk about it enough because they're not the ones who, are either physically at risk or the people who've been laid off. They're working somewhere for 30 years or whatever it is. But I mean, we've all had JJ's first job is very unique compared to
super unique
to everybody else.
Yeah.
But at the same point, you're in a spot where like you're used to being in a work environment and figuring these things out for the first time. And then all of a sudden you just can't. It's like, how are you supposed to have a mentor if everything is on Zoom and you've never even met the people you're working with?
Yeah. And this is something that is not like a short-term problem. It's a medium, long-term problem. When you look at the numbers, where if someone, for example, graduates from college in a pandemic, no, not in a pandemic, because there's a precedent for that. In a recession, if someone graduates from college in a recession, it sometimes takes years for them to recover, and sometimes that recovery never happens. So this is not something that we should make light of at all. It's fundamental. It's one reason why I always loved working with and investing in young people, because you feel like that investment positively can compound over time. And so that's the attitude we should take. And if you're a young person, like, your country owes you better, frankly. Like, we can do something about this, but we need to get control of government, then actually activate in a way that's going to help you.
The other issue is it's really difficult as a young person who just started a job to have such a great Zoom background, that you like. I don't even know what Tommy has right now. I'm in some random conference
Andrew's got
room.
A pro. That's a CNN background. That's what happens.
He's clearly done some television.
You get the cable money.
I mean, no, what this says is that I'm married, and my wife was like, "Why the hell is your background so freaking lame?"
I love it.
Can you give like your 45-second take on everything that has happened over the last 4 days?
I think this last week has been a total disaster for Trump and Trump's campaign. And one thing that I said is that it's very hard to get people to forget about the coronavirus when you have the coronavirus. No, like this has been the worst week, not just on a messaging level, but on a personnel and operational level. I've been a candidate, and you have this entire apparatus around you that's trying to get you to a place and like have the event and everything, and all that went off the rails. And then you have your team that's looking around. The campaign manager literally has to self-quarantine. And so you can imagine that cascading through their organization in different ways. This has just been a terrible, terrible week for Trump. And it came out in a poll today, where a poll that was taken after the debate has Joe up 57-41. Which is a bigger lead than has been the case. And that's a national poll. It was by CNN. So I also think that Trump's still fighting it. in my opinion. You know, I feel like they brought him back to the White House for appearance. I'm sure he's going to get the best care possible there. But this is not like this is not a straightforward virus to treat. Like it kind of creeps around. You know, it can flare up in different ways and different stages. And given the timeline, like I don't think that we're done with Trump and coronavirus just yet.
I thought we were going to get through the whole thing without talking about that, Tommy.
Oh, we can't, man. Sorry. This is totally
up to you.
I wanted to make it about Andrew. You want to make it about Trump.
This is where we are, unfortunately.
Let's go. Let's do the draft. So we gave you the draft topic ahead of time. Our draft we do different drafts every episode. Our draft category for today's episode is the most unforgettable New York City sports moments in the last 30 years.
I'm up first.
Guest is always up first. Guest always gets the number one pick.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is the Mets-Braves game after 9/11 in 2001. It was the first major sporting event after the towers fell, and it was unforgettable. And the Mets pulled it out, like I think Piazza hit a huge home run, and even the Braves were happy about it. It was that kind of night. So that to me is the first sports moment of the last 30 years that cemented in my mind.
That was the Piazza home run was iconic.
Yeah. Bottom of the 8th, 2-run homer, put them up 3-2. They close it out in the 9th. Iconic game, iconic moment. Great first pick.
Great first pick.
Yeah.
All right, I'm taking it off the board because this also could have been the first pick. David Tyree, helmet catch.
Helmet catch is there.
08 Super Bowl.
My first pick is the O.J. Simpson car chase during the 1994 NBA Finals, Game 5, June 7th, Knicks versus Houston. That is an unforgettable sports moment, Tommy.
For their first pick?
That's my first pick.
They were literally tuning away from the New York sports part of it. I guess he's a Buffalo Bill. That's an LA story.
That's not an LA story. The Knicks are in the finals. They're the most iconic, maybe other than the Giants and the Yankees, most iconic sports franchise in New York City.
I remember. All I would say is I remember that very, very vividly because it was the Knicks in the finals, and then all of a sudden it's the freaking OJ Bronco chase and the rest of it. And it is emblazoned in my mind like just about nothing else. So on that level, you can't take it away from him. I mean, he's right. Like I do remember that very, very clearly.
All right. It counts.
All right. My second pick before we go back to Tommy. I don't think you're going to like any of my picks here, Tommy, now that I think about it. My second most unforgettable New York City sports moments is Reggie Miller's 8 points in 9 seconds in Game 1 of the 95 Eastern Conference semifinals against the Knicks at the Garden. One of my favorite basketball moments, period, of my life.
That was incredible. I remember watching that game being like, this game's over. And then like, holy crap, what happened? What's going on? Yeah, choke, Spike Lee, the rest of it. I do think that Reggie got away with a shove. Like he shoved, I think it was Starks down. Yes. Like the ball just came straight to Reggie. Like that was, but he deserved it. You know, I mean, that was heartbreaking though, because I was a huge Knicks fan that era.
Where does that rank, JJ, in terms of individual 3-point shooting effort theatrics? If we were to, I mean, we may do that ranking, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to really think about it. You know, I like when I think of like that game against OKC, and it was a regular season game, but when Steph hit the like 40-footer with like 0.6 seconds, like that game, I think he had 10 or 11 threes. Clay's Game 6 against OKC in the playoffs where he hits, 9 threes. Like there were probably better ones, but like for that moment, that 9 seconds, that was crazy.
All right, my second pick, Aaron Boone, walk-off, 2004 Red Sox. Just a killer. I'm not even a Yankees fan, but it was just a killer. So, Andrew, I'm a Cubs fan, and that same year was the Bartman year. And those two games, I believe, were either on the following days or within the same week. the Bartman, the Cubs blowing it and the Red Sox blowing it.
That is nuts. I do remember that. This could be a little bit of my bias showing, but I'm going to say Linsanity, which has a number of different dates to it. If you had to pick one out, it would be like the Jeremy Lin puts up 38 points against Kobe when the Lakers came to town. Like there was one game where you were like, wow, this thing is happening. The whole thing just felt like a movie script. That was too much fun. What were the dates on that game? I think one was like the 2014 season, I want to say. Hang on. Anyone know? You were in the league at that point, obviously.
I think it was before that because I was maybe 2012. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
No, you're right. You're right. It was 2012. Oh, I can't believe so much time has flown. You're right. It was 2012.
I know. Isn't that wild?
Oh my gosh.
That's wild. My draft board is slowly shrinking in options as you guys take these moments off the board because Linsanity and Aaron Boone were my next two picks. So that's great. All right. Andrew, you get a second pick here.
All right, I'm going to stick with the Knicks theme, and this also is a little bit of bias because I was in the Garden at the time, but the Larry Johnson 4-point play, also against the Pacers, the Big L. I was there. I had cheap seats because, I was a student at the time. I have no clue how I actually even had playoff tickets. Like really looking at it, it's like, for the life of me, I have no idea how I was in the Garden, but I was there. LJ was one of my favorite players of all time too. I just love that dude. He just seemed like such a good teammate. He, adapted even after his back started going, and like he just became a skill player instead of a physical dominating dunker. So yeah, LJ. Larry Johnson, 4-point play against the Pacers.
It's a great pick. LJ, actually, I had his grandmama posters up in my room as a kid. Like when he was on the Charlotte Hornets, I was obsessed with Larry Johnson. There's that, like the pan out camera angle of that 4-point play. It was 1999 Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers, Game 3, and you just see the Garden erupt. And every time I see that clip, I get a little sad inside because the Knicks suck. All right.
All right. My third pick, I can't pick a positive Knicks story from the last 30 years, so I'm picking the Scotty dunk on Charles Smith in 95.
Wow.
That's my iconic Knicks moment. I was between the Scotty dunk and another one, which I won't give away.
I thought he dunked on Patrick.
He dunked on Ewing.
That was on Ewing. And then he stood over him?
Oh, it was on Pat. So it was on
Yes.
Charles didn't get the rebound. It was on Patrick. That's it.
Yes.
So it's a dunk on Patrick.
Yes. It was a dunk on Ewing. That's a great one. All right. Pick 3 and 4 for me. All right. So I'm going John Stark's dunk.
That was my next one.
On Horace Grant. It was not on MJ. Check all the camera angles. 93 Eastern Conference Finals, Game 2.
MJ was in the vicinity. He was in the picture.
All right. My next pick, I may end up with two of these, but all right, my next pick, I'm going to go with 2001 U.S. Open Women's Finals, Serena versus Venus. Venus won. It was the first time two sisters had played against each other in a Grand Slam in 117 years. The issue that a lot of people don't remember this moment is because the final was on September 8th, 2001.
Oh.
So a lot of people don't talk about this. And they had other matches. I think there was a quarterfinal in 2008 at the U.S. Open that was maybe a better match. Yeah. But this was a significant moment for tennis. And it was the first time that they had played each other in a Grand Slam final. So I'm going to go with Serena versus Venus, 2001 U.S. Open final.
Good pick. I was wondering if someone was going to do tennis. I'm going for pick 4. Shout out to Chris, who also suggested as I had this on the board. Scott Norwood, missed field goal. Buffalo Bills. The Bills in general.
Oh my gosh!
Just
that was 1990, right? That barely made the cutoff.
1990. Wow. Just got it. Just snuck it in.
All right. That's a good pick.
All right. You got two more, Andrew. Close it out.
Okay. I'm going to do one just because it's emblazoned in my mind. This is a little bit of JJ-esque. but I'm gonna go with like the Mark Sanchez butt fumble.
Yes. It's a great pick. It's the best Jets moment of ever.
I was just like, you just can't, because like there was a period when I was rooting for the Jets, and I was like, oh, this just about sums it up. So that was rough.
That's such a great pick. That's the pick of the draft right there. That is the pick of the draft.
Butt fumble, great value in the 4th round.
Yeah, always good for a laugh. We all know where we were when it happened. And then the other thing that is not really a moment, but for whatever reason, this like there was a period like this. It was like the Mets Yankees World Series in 2000 that I was really excited about that series. And you know, like if there's a moment you remember, it's probably Roger Clemens kind of roiding it up at Piazza. It's like I think it's like he where Piazza threw he like broke a bat, and then like Clemens was like, you know, challenging him from the mound. That's what I remember. I was a Mets fan, and the Yankees dominating us was not great, but I do remember that series very vividly. I feel like that's like a big New York moment for a lot of fans.
Solid.
It's a great one. Great one. Also on my draft board. Also on my draft.
I had a few. I was going back and forth. The other Yankees option I'm not going to pick. Well, I'll say it after JJ goes. But there's another Yankees option I'm going to pick. My 5th one, this is probably a terrible pick, but I'm going 98 Heat Knicks fight.
Oh,
where
gosh.
Jeff Van Gundy is grabbing.
Oh, I'm so mad about that. Oh, which one? Which one? Which one?
The one where Jeff Van Gundy is grabbing at
Alonzo Mourning's ankles.
At Alonzo's ankles to try to stop him.
Yeah, so LJ is fighting Alonzo, and then Jeff Van Gundy gets in there to try to break it up.
Just an amazing YouTube rewatch.
Tommy, I actually think that was your best pick. I actually think that was your best
That's pretty
pick.
good value in the 5th round.
That's great value.
I thought you might have been going PJ Brown, Charlie Ward. Like that fight also pisses me off to this day. Like you remember that when like Charlie Ward was boxing him out, and then PJ Brown flips him, and then and then the fight, and then the Knicks get suspended. The Knicks totally had that freaking series. And then the Knicks would have had a real shot at the Bulls at like the kind of apex of that version of the Knicks. And instead, freaking the Heat stole a series because of that nonsense call and leaving the bench and blah, blah, blah. Come on, David Stern.
He's not over it.
It's very rare that a podcast we do doesn't mention Kobe Bryant. I'm not going to pick this, but Chris Childs, I think he was on the Knicks when he did this, but he two-pieced Kobe in the face. I mean, he hit him with a 1-2 combo quick. So that's another sort of iconic Knicks fight. My 5th pick, I'm going with arguably one of the greatest tennis matches ever, and that's Sampras and Agassi in 2001. No serve was broken in the entire match. It only ended up going 4 sets, but every set went to tiebreaker. Sampras ended up beating Agassi. They had met in 95 in the U.S. Open Finals, but this 2001 match is considered sort of the apex of their rivalry and is considered one of the greatest tennis matches in U.S. Open history.
Wow, great pick. I remember that match. And one book that, if you haven't read, even though it seems a little bit older now, is Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open. Great book.
Really good.
Yeah. So, that match does stand out. Good pick, JJ.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
I think we all did well.
I think we all did well here. There's no egregious choices.
Yeah, this doesn't usually happen, Andrew. Usually the guest comes on and mops the two of us, but I think we did okay this time. I don't know about OJ, but everything else was...
OJ's going to play well on social. All right. Andrew, thank you so much for the time. It was great to catch up with you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
No problem, guys. Great being with you. Everyone, get out there and vote. You can do it. We have to give ourselves a chance to turn the page, and this is the biggest chance we're going to get for quite some time.